Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every decision you've made in the past year, what you watched, what you bought, what you scrolled through at 2 a.m., wasn't really yours. Imagine learning that your desires, those intimate cravings you thought defined your individuality, were carefully cultivated by forces you never questioned. Now imagine something even more unsettling: you participated willingly, eagerly even, in your own conditioning. No one forced you. No one had to. Today we will explore how the pursuit of pleasure can quietly ruin lives, how comfort can weaken the human spirit, and how modern slavery no longer looks like oppression, but like entertainment, distraction, and endless gratification. This is not just philosophy. This is about your daily choices, your habits, and the invisible forces shaping your mind. If this kind of reflection speaks to you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and comment your thoughts as we go. What we are about to uncover may change the way you see pleasure, freedom, and even yourself. Aldous Huxley, influenced by thinkers like Sigmund Freud and deeply concerned with the future of human consciousness, understood something essential about human nature. He knew that human beings do not need to be violently controlled if they can be gently seduced. In his vision, people are not oppressed by pain but by pleasure. Not silenced by fear but distracted by comfort. Pleasure in itself is not the enemy. The danger arises when pleasure becomes the highest value, when it replaces meaning, discipline, and purpose. Modern psychology confirms what ancient philosophers like Aristotle already suspected: a life dedicated solely to pleasure leads not to fulfillment but to emptiness. Picture yourself sitting in a room filled with everything you've ever wanted. Food that tastes exactly right. Entertainment that never bores you. Comfort that wraps around you like a second skin. The temperature is perfect. The lighting is soft. Every impulse is satisfied before it fully forms into conscious want. Now answer this honestly: in this room, are you free? Or have you simply become so comfortable in your cage that you've forgotten what freedom feels like? This is not a hypothetical scenario designed to unsettle you for dramatic effect. This is, in varying degrees, the reality you already inhabit. The cage exists. The difference is that its bars are made of dopamine, its locks are pleasure, and its guards are your own desires turned against you. Huxley saw this coming decades before smartphones, before streaming services, before the algorithmic curation of human attention became the most profitable industry on earth. He understood something that most people still refuse to confront: that the most effective slavery is the kind you choose for yourself. That the most dangerous chains are the ones that feel like liberation. That true captivity doesn't announce itself with the rattle of metal, it whispers in the voice of comfort, promising that happiness is just one more click, one more purchase, one more distraction away. But here's the paradox that should terrify you: the pursuit of pleasure, that most human of instincts, that thing we've been told is our birthright, our ultimate goal, the very measure of a life well lived, what if it's slowly destroying the possibility of real fulfillment? What if every moment you spend chasing the next hit of satisfaction is a moment you lose the capacity for something deeper, something that actually matters? Consider this uncomfortable truth. You have access to more pleasure than any human being in history. More entertainment. More comfort. More ways to feel good right now. Your ancestors would have called you a king for the ease you possess. Yet are you happier than they were? Are you more at peace? More fulfilled? Or do you find yourself perpetually restless, always reaching for something more, never quite satisfied, caught in an endless loop of craving and consumption that promises everything but delivers only temporary relief from an ache you can't quite name? This is where it gets truly disturbing. The ache itself, that gnawing sense that something is missing, that hollow feeling that sends you reaching for your phone, for food, for any form of stimulation, might not be a problem to be solved through more pleasure. It might be the consequence of too much pleasure. It might be your soul trying to tell you something that your overstimulated nervous system can no longer hear. What if the boredom you can't tolerate is actually wisdom trying to emerge? What if the discomfort you immediately medicate with distraction is growth attempting to happen? What if the silence you fill with noise is precisely where your true self has been waiting to speak? We've been taught to view pain as the enemy and pleasure as the goal. This seems so obvious, so self-evident, that to question it feels almost absurd. Yet throughout history, every wisdom tradition, every philosophical system that has produced lasting human flourishing has suggested something radically different, that meaning emerges from struggle, that character is forged in difficulty, that depth requires the willingness to sit with discomfort long enough for transformation to occur. Modern life has engineered discomfort out of existence. We no longer wait. We no longer tolerate boredom. We no longer sit with our thoughts. We no longer face our fears. We no longer embrace the friction that shapes us into something stronger, wiser, more fully human. Instead, we swipe. We scroll. We consume. We numb. We escape. And with each escape, we lose a little more of the capacity to be present to our own lives. This is the great question that haunts our age, the one we're too distracted to ask, too comfortable to confront. What happens to a human being when all struggle is removed, when every desire is instantly satisfied, when pleasure becomes not just available but inescapable? What happens to a society that has forgotten how to embrace discomfort, how to delay gratification, how to pursue meaning even when it hurts? The answer is emerging all around you. In the epidemic of anxiety. In the crisis of meaning. In the hollowing out of human connection. In the strange paradox of being constantly entertained yet perpetually dissatisfied. In the millions of people who have everything they thought they wanted and feel, somehow, that they have nothing at all. You stand at the threshold of a realization that will either enslave you further or set you free. The choice is yours. But first, you must understand how deep the conditioning goes, how subtle the mechanisms of modern slavery really are, and why the path to freedom might require you to do the one thing you've been trained your entire life to avoid: embrace what is difficult. The mechanism of modern slavery operates on a principle so simple it's almost embarrassing: give people what they want, and they will forget to ask what they need. This is not conspiracy. This is biology meeting culture, neuroscience intersecting with economics, ancient human wiring colliding with unprecedented technological sophistication. Carl Jung warned that what we refuse to confront within ourselves will manifest outside as fate. Look at what society refuses to confront: the emptiness behind constant stimulation, the anxiety beneath endless choice, the loneliness inside perpetual connection. These are not random epidemics. They are symptoms of a deeper wound, one that pleasure systematically prevents us from examining. Here's what happens in your brain when pleasure becomes constant. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation, did not evolve for unlimited access. It evolved to reward effort, to celebrate survival, to mark achievement. When your ancestors found food after days of searching, dopamine flooded their system. The chemical said, "Remember this, do this again, this matters." The scarcity made the reward meaningful. The effort made the pleasure valuable. Now dopamine fires constantly. A notification. A like. A new episode. A delivered package. The chemical that once signaled genuine achievement now responds to engineered triggers designed by teams of psychologists employed to keep you engaged. Your brain cannot tell the difference between real accomplishment and simulated reward. So it recalibrates. What once brought satisfaction now barely registers. What once felt good now feels necessary just to feel normal. You're not chasing pleasure anymore. You're running from the absence of it. This creates what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, the treadmill where each pleasure demands a stronger dose to produce the same effect. But there's something darker happening beneath this cycle. Friedrich Nietzsche understood that comfort doesn't just fail to strengthen us, it actively weakens us. "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger" wasn't motivational rhetoric. It was observation. The soul, like muscle, requires resistance to develop. Remove all friction, and atrophy is inevitable. Modern culture has declared war on discomfort. Boredom is treated as a crisis requiring immediate intervention. Waiting feels like punishment. Silence becomes unbearable. Even sadness is pathologized, medicated away before it can deliver its message. Yet these uncomfortable states serve crucial functions. Boredom signals that your mind needs deeper engagement. Waiting teaches patience and presence. Silence reveals what noise conceals. Sadness processes loss and reorients values. When you eliminate these experiences, you don't eliminate their function, you just prevent their purpose from being fulfilled. The need doesn't disappear. It goes underground, manifesting as anxiety, restlessness, and a vague sense that something essential is missing even when you have everything you thought you wanted. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, observed something that seems paradoxical until you truly grasp it. Humans can endure almost any suffering if they find meaning in it, but they crumble when life feels meaningless. The pursuit of pleasure strips life of meaning because meaning requires responsibility, demands patience, sometimes necessitates suffering. Pleasure asks nothing from you except surrender. It promises happiness without cost, fulfillment without effort, satisfaction without sacrifice. This is the lie at the heart of the pleasure-driven existence, that comfort equals contentment, that ease equals happiness, that the absence of pain equals the presence of joy. But these equations are fundamentally false. True contentment emerges from alignment with purpose. Real happiness flows from meaningful contribution. Lasting joy comes from depth of experience, not breadth of pleasure. Arthur Schopenhauer recognized that human desire is inherently insatiable. Satisfy one want, and another immediately appears. This endless craving, what he called the will to life, creates perpetual dissatisfaction. The only escape, he argued, was through aesthetic contemplation and ascetic denial, essentially, stepping off the treadmill of desire entirely. Modern capitalism has done the opposite. It has industrialized desire, making want itself the engine of society. You are not meant to be satisfied. Satisfaction ends consumption. The system requires perpetual craving, endless reaching, constant incompleteness. This is why pleasure today feels different from pleasure in previous eras. It's been weaponized. Optimized. Engineered to create dependency rather than fulfillment. The philosophers saw this coming. Epicurus himself, whose name became synonymous with pleasure-seeking, actually taught the opposite of what modern culture practices. He advocated for simple pleasures, friendship, and freedom from unnecessary desire. He warned that unlimited pleasure-seeking leads to unlimited suffering. True pleasure, he taught, comes from the absence of pain and the presence of peace, not from constant stimulation. But peace requires stillness. Stillness requires the ability to sit with yourself without distraction. And that ability is precisely what constant pleasure systematically destroys. Each time you reach for stimulation to avoid discomfort, you reinforce the pattern. Over time, the capacity for stillness, and with it, the capacity for depth, wisdom, and genuine self-knowledge, atrophies. This is the hidden problem. Pleasure doesn't just fail to provide what it promises. It actively destroys your capacity to find what you're actually seeking. The true horror of modern slavery isn't that it controls you, it's that it makes you believe you're free while doing so. Consider how seamlessly this system has woven itself into the fabric of your daily existence. You wake up and immediately check your phone. Not because something urgent awaits, but because the compulsion has become automatic. Your hand reaches before your consciousness fully awakens. This is not choice. This is conditioning so deep it precedes thought itself. The algorithms know you better than you know yourself. They track every hesitation, every click, every moment your attention wavers. They learn your patterns, predict your desires, and serve them back to you with such precision that resistance feels increasingly pointless. You wanted this, didn't you? You chose to watch, to scroll, to consume. Except you didn't choose the desire itself. The desire was cultivated, nurtured, and triggered by systems designed for exactly this purpose. This is where the slavery becomes invisible. There are no chains because the leash is your own want. There are no masters because the control is internalized. You police yourself, reaching for stimulation not because anyone forces you, but because the absence of it has become intolerable. Freedom has been redefined as access to unlimited options, while the capacity to choose meaningful limitation, the essence of true autonomy, has been systematically eroded. Watch what happens to your mind under constant stimulation. Attention spans collapse. The ability to sustain focus on anything complex or unrewarding deteriorates. You find yourself skimming rather than reading, scrolling rather than engaging, consuming rather than creating. Depth becomes impossible because depth requires sustained attention, and sustained attention requires the tolerance of discomfort that comes with difficult thinking. Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. When pleasure becomes the primary escape mechanism, the shadow grows monstrous. Unprocessed fear doesn't disappear when you distract yourself from it. Buried anger doesn't dissolve when you numb it with entertainment. Unexamined insecurity doesn't heal when you cover it with artificial validation. These denied aspects of yourself accumulate in the unconscious, waiting, festering, eventually manifesting as anxiety, depression, or sudden crisis. Modern individuals are walking pressure cookers of unprocessed emotion, unexamined belief, and unintegrated experience. But the valve that would release this pressure, authentic self-reflection, difficult emotional work, honest confrontation with uncomfortable truths, has been sealed shut by the relentless availability of distraction. You can always escape. There's always something else to watch, consume, or scroll through. Until suddenly, you can't escape anymore, and everything you've been avoiding crashes down at once. Consider what's happening to human relationships. When pleasure becomes the primary value, commitment feels restrictive. Depth requires patience, vulnerability, and the willingness to stay present through difficulty. But a mind conditioned for instant gratification cannot tolerate the slow burn of genuine intimacy. As soon as discomfort appears, and real relationships always involve discomfort, the impulse is to escape. To find something easier. Something that feels better right now. The result is a generation drowning in connection yet starving for intimacy. Thousands of online friends, yet profound loneliness. Constant communication, yet nobody really listening. Relationships become transactional, valued for what they provide rather than who they help you become. Love gets reduced to a feeling that should always be pleasant, rather than a commitment that sometimes requires suffering. The same pattern infects your relationship with work and personal growth. Mastery of anything worthwhile demands repetition, frustration, failure, and the willingness to persist when progress feels invisible. But a nervous system rewired for immediate reward cannot sustain this kind of effort. The moment learning stops feeling good, the mind rebels. Why continue when pleasure is available elsewhere? This creates a cruel paradox. You have access to more knowledge, more resources, more opportunity than any generation in history, yet produce less wisdom, less mastery, less genuine achievement. Information is everywhere, but the capacity to transform information into understanding, which requires sustained thought, difficult practice, and uncomfortable self-examination, has been systematically undermined. Søren Kierkegaard described despair as the sickness unto death, a self that does not want to be itself. Pleasure becomes the ultimate avoidance of this confrontation. Instead of asking who you are, what you value, what you're becoming, you simply consume. The question never gets asked because asking requires silence, and silence has become unbearable. This is cognitive slavery, not the inability to think, but the destruction of the desire to think deeply. Not the prohibition of truth, but the irrelevance of truth in a world optimized for feeling good. Huxley feared a society where truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance, where people would become so distracted by pleasure that they'd lose interest in knowledge, wisdom, or meaning. Look around. His prophecy isn't coming true, it already has. The most devastating consequence is this: you lose yourself without even noticing. Your preferences become algorithm-generated suggestions. Your beliefs become whatever feels good to believe. Your identity becomes a curated performance optimized for validation. The authentic self, messy, contradictory, uncomfortable, real, gets buried so deep that you forget it exists. And here's what makes this truly insidious: the system doesn't survive because it's imposed from outside. It survives because you defend it. Because admitting you're trapped would require confronting how much time, energy, and life you've already surrendered. Because freedom would demand discomfort, and you've lost the capacity to tolerate discomfort long enough to escape. The path to freedom begins with a single, uncomfortable realization: you are not your desires. This sounds simple, perhaps even obvious, until you truly examine it. How many of your daily choices originate from conscious intention versus conditioned response? How many of your wants are actually yours versus carefully implanted suggestions you've internalized as personal preference? The rebellion against modern slavery doesn't look like revolution. It looks like a quiet morning where you don't immediately reach for your phone. It looks like choosing to sit with boredom instead of eliminating it. It looks like the radical act of doing nothing when everything in your environment screams for stimulation. This is where ancient wisdom becomes startlingly relevant. The Stoics understood that freedom lives not in controlling circumstances but in controlling attention and response. Epictetus, himself born a slave, taught that true liberty exists in the space between stimulus and reaction. That space, that crucial gap where choice lives, has been systematically colonized by pleasure-seeking patterns. Reclaiming it requires what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of perception. Start by observing your impulses without immediately satisfying them. When the urge to check your phone arises, pause. Don't judge the urge. Don't fight it. Simply notice it. Watch how it intensifies, peaks, and eventually subsides if left unacted upon. This simple practice reveals something profound: most of your cravings are not needs. They're habits masquerading as necessities. Viktor Frankl discovered in the concentration camps that between stimulus and response lies a space, and in that space lies your power to choose. The camp stripped away everything: freedom, dignity, even hope, yet some prisoners maintained their humanity by exercising the one freedom that couldn't be taken, the freedom to choose their attitude, their response, their inner stance toward suffering. You face nothing remotely comparable to such horror, yet you've surrendered this fundamental freedom for far less: for entertainment, for comfort, for the temporary relief of not having to be present with yourself. The question becomes, if Frankl could find freedom in a death camp, can you find it in your comfortable life? The answer requires embracing what Nietzsche called voluntary hardship, deliberately choosing difficulty not because you must, but because difficulty builds what pleasure erodes. Fast when food is available. Sit in silence when entertainment beckons. Create when consumption would be easier. These aren't acts of self-punishment. They're exercises in reclaiming agency. Consider the practice of delayed gratification, that increasingly rare capacity to resist immediate pleasure for greater future reward. The famous marshmallow experiment revealed that children who could wait for a larger reward demonstrated better life outcomes decades later. But this wasn't about willpower, it was about the ability to hold a larger vision in mind while tolerating present discomfort. Modern culture has inverted this equation. The future is sacrificed constantly for the present moment's pleasure. You scroll instead of sleep, knowing you'll regret it tomorrow. You consume instead of create, knowing creation would bring deeper satisfaction. You escape instead of engage, knowing engagement leads to growth. Each choice feels small, but identity is nothing more than the accumulation of these small choices repeated thousands of times. This is where the rebellion becomes practical. Design friction back into your life. Make pleasure slightly harder to access. Remove apps that hijack attention. Create barriers between impulse and action. Not to eliminate pleasure entirely, but to ensure that when pleasure comes, it's chosen consciously rather than consumed reflexively. The Buddhists understood that suffering arises not from desire itself but from clinging to desire. The distinction is crucial. You can experience pleasure without being enslaved by the need for pleasure. You can enjoy comfort without being unable to tolerate discomfort. Freedom exists in the non-attachment, the ability to hold things lightly rather than desperately. Reclaim silence. This might be the most radical act available to you. Silence reveals what noise conceals. In silence, you discover what you actually think versus what you've been told to think. You encounter who you are beneath the curated persona. You feel the emotions you've been avoiding. You hear the wisdom that can't shout over stimulation. Start small. 5 minutes daily of sitting without distraction. No phone. No music. No task. Just presence with whatever arises. This will feel excruciating at first. Your mind will rebel. Discomfort will surge. Restlessness will scream for relief. This is precisely the point. You're meeting the addiction head-on, and like all addictions, it fights desperately to maintain its grip. Jung taught that what you resist persists, but what you befriend transforms. The shadow, all those uncomfortable aspects you've been avoiding, doesn't need to be defeated. It needs to be integrated. This means turning toward difficulty rather than away from it. Feeling your anxiety instead of numbing it. Examining your anger instead of projecting it. Acknowledging your fear instead of hiding it. History provides examples of those who broke free from cultural conditioning through conscious choice. Thoreau withdrew to Walden Pond not to escape society but to discover what life required when stripped to essentials. Gandhi fasted not from weakness but from the understanding that voluntary sacrifice creates moral authority. Mandela emerged from decades of imprisonment not broken but strengthened, because his inner freedom remained untouched. You don't need to move to a cabin or become an ascetic. You simply need to practice the lost art of conscious limitation. Choose one pleasure and fast from it for a week. Notice what happens. Observe the withdrawal, the rationalization, the desperate bargaining your mind employs. Then notice what emerges on the other side: clarity, presence, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can choose. The rebellion is this: reclaiming authority over your own attention, recognizing conditioning without being controlled by it, and building the capacity to choose meaning even when pleasure is available. Here is the truth that changes everything, the realization so profound it cannot be unseen once glimpsed: freedom and pleasure are not opposites, but pleasure without consciousness becomes the most sophisticated form of imprisonment ever devised. This is the final paradox, the one that reframes everything you thought you understood about liberation, happiness, and what it means to live a human life. The system that has enslaved you through pleasure survives not because it was imposed from outside, but because you participate in it willingly, believing it to be freedom. This is not your fault, you were conditioned from birth. But it becomes your responsibility the moment you become aware of it. Awareness is the threshold. What you do with that awareness determines whether you remain captive or step into genuine autonomy. Aldous Huxley's deepest warning was never about pleasure itself. It was about unexamined pleasure, desire that flows through you without your conscious participation, want that controls rather than serves you, gratification that replaces growth. When pleasure becomes unconscious, when it operates as reflex rather than choice, slavery begins. But when pleasure is placed in its proper role, as a tool, as a reward for meaningful effort, as a complement to purpose rather than a substitute for it, freedom returns. This distinction is everything. The problem was never that you experience pleasure. The problem is that pleasure has been experiencing you, moving through you, shaping you, determining your choices, organizing your life around its pursuit while you believe yourself to be in control. True freedom begins the moment you can observe your desires without being consumed by them, the moment you can choose to delay or deny gratification not from guilt or fear, but from alignment with something larger than immediate satisfaction. B.F. Skinner demonstrated that behavior can be shaped more effectively through reward than punishment. The implications are staggering: you have been operantly conditioned, your response is carefully cultivated through precisely timed dopamine hits, your behavior shaped through pleasure the way a trainer shapes an animal. But here's what Skinner couldn't account for: awareness itself changes the equation. A rat cannot become conscious of its conditioning. You can. The moment you recognize a pattern, it begins to lose its power. The moment you see the mechanism, you can choose whether to participate. This is the crack in the system, the vulnerability in modern slavery's armor: it requires your unconsciousness to function. Shine light on it, and its grip weakens. But awareness alone is insufficient. Awareness without action is just another form of intellectual entertainment. The ultimate truth demands embodiment. You must practice freedom, not just think about it. And practicing freedom in a pleasure-saturated world means deliberately choosing what is difficult. This is where everything inverts. What culture teaches as deprivation, saying no to immediate pleasure, tolerating discomfort, embracing limitation, is actually liberation. What culture sells as freedom, unlimited access, instant gratification, the removal of all barriers between desire and fulfillment, is actually captivity. The chains are invisible precisely because they're made of yes, of more, of now, of easy. Real freedom tastes like restraint. It feels like the quiet pride of choosing long-term meaning over short-term pleasure. It manifests as the growing capacity to sit with yourself without distraction, to endure boredom without panic, to feel difficult emotions without numbing them, to pursue challenging goals without constant reward. Viktor Frankl's core insight becomes the foundation of liberation. Meaning is not found in pleasure but in responsibility. Responsibility requires effort. Effort requires tolerance for discomfort. And discomfort is precisely what you've been trained your entire life to avoid. This is why reclaiming discomfort becomes the ultimate rebellion, not seeking pain for its own sake, but developing the capacity to choose difficulty when difficulty serves growth. Consider what remains when all pleasure is stripped away. Not hypothetically, but actually. Sit for an hour without any stimulation. No phone. No book. No music. No task. Just you and consciousness. What emerges? Fear, perhaps. Restlessness, certainly. Anxiety about wasted time. Racing thoughts seeking escape. But if you persist, if you can tolerate this discomfort without fleeing, something else appears beneath the noise. Clarity. Presence. The recognition of your own aliveness independent of external stimulation. A quiet strength that doesn't require anything outside yourself to exist. This is the ground of genuine freedom, the discovery that you are not dependent on pleasure to be okay, that your well-being doesn't require constant satisfaction, that you possess an inner stability that exists regardless of circumstances. Carl Jung called this process individuation, becoming whole by integrating what has been denied, including the capacity to suffer consciously. A society that avoids discomfort produces fragmented individuals, people who are partial, reactive, controlled by whatever promises to make them feel better right now. But individuals who can embrace their complete experience, pleasure and pain, comfort and difficulty, satisfaction and longing, become whole. And whole people cannot be easily manipulated. This is why totalitarian systems, whether political or commercial, require fragmentation. Fragmented people seek external completion. They're predictable, controllable, forever reaching for the next thing that promises to fill the void. But a person who has discovered their own wholeness, who has developed inner authority through conscious engagement with difficulty, becomes autonomous in the truest sense, self-governing, self-directed, impossible to control through the manipulation of desire. Here is the final realization: modern slavery ends not through revolution but through awareness. Not through force but through discipline. Not through rejecting pleasure but through understanding its proper place. Pleasure is not your master unless you make it so. It becomes your master when you cannot tolerate its absence, when your behavior is organized around seeking it, when its pursuit replaces the deeper work of building a meaningful life. Ask yourself this concluding question, the one that reveals where your freedom truly lives: if every source of pleasure disappeared tomorrow, every form of entertainment, every comfort, every distraction, what within you would remain strong? What values would guide you? What meaning would sustain you? Your answer to this question is the measure of your actual freedom. If the answer frightens you, good. Fear means you're seeing clearly. And seeing clearly is the first step toward living consciously. Because the ultimate truth is this: you have been asleep, moving through life on autopilot, your choices made by patterns you didn't choose, your desires shaped by forces you didn't question, your identity constructed from conditioned responses rather than conscious intention. But you can wake up. Right now. This moment. Not through dramatic gestures or radical life changes, but through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing awareness over unconsciousness, meaning over pleasure, depth over distraction. Each time you pause before reaching for your phone, you practice freedom. Each time you sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, you reclaim power. Each time you choose what is meaningful over what is easy, you become more fully yourself. The path away from modern slavery does not begin in society, in technology, or in circumstances. It begins in your mind. In the space between impulse and action. In the quiet moment when you recognize that you have a choice, that you have always had a choice, and that this choice, made consciously, repeatedly, courageously, determines whether you live as a free human being or as a sophisticated mechanism responding to stimuli. Freedom is not something given by the world. It is something practiced daily through awareness, discipline, and the willingness to embrace what is difficult. It is not comfortable. It is not easy. It is not constantly pleasurable. But it is real. It is yours. And it is available right now if you're willing to reach for it. The cage door has always been unlocked. You simply stopped checking because you forgot you were in a cage. Now you know. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you return to comfortable captivity, or will you step into the uncertain freedom of conscious living? That choice, more than any pleasure you could pursue, will determine the shape of your life and the depth of your humanity. Choose wisely. Choose consciously. And remember, every moment you resist an unconscious impulse, every moment you choose meaning over ease, you are participating in the most profound revolution possible, the liberation of your own mind. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Because now that you see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it. Now that you understand the cost of unconscious pleasure, you cannot return to innocent consumption. Now that you know freedom requires discomfort, the path forward becomes clear even if it remains difficult. Walk it anyway. Not because it will be easy, but because it will be true. Not because it will always feel good, but because it will make you real. Not because others will understand, but because you will finally understand yourself. The power to set yourself free has always lived within you. It simply waited for the moment you would stop seeking salvation in pleasure and start building it through conscious choice, meaningful struggle, and the courage to be fully, uncomfortably, magnificently alive.